Welcome back to the 71 Jimmy full build series. Today we're going to look at some of the things that affected steering and how we can improve the looseness that Justin wanted us to look at on his truck. Demonstrate the looseness that you're talking about. This all has to do with steering play that's sort of additive. Everything adds a little bit of looseness. It's the steering gearbox, it's the steering column, it's the rag joint, the knuckles, the steering wheel, the tie rod ends, the center link. So everything has play, and we have to address all those things that are the worst. There are issues you can't even imagine that will actually affect steering.
Ball joints take a lot more brute force than normal things, so I'm probably going to just beat these into submission and then put a new set in. Now that I got all this other stuff out of my way, it would be easier to put the steering box in now than it would be to wait, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. Because the one that was in it was a leaky mess. I had to get rid of that. The power steering pump has a giant O-ring in it, and that O-ring had failed, and the pump was really leaky. Everything I pull apart is rusty and ugly. There's so many different things in the steering that to genuinely tighten one up, it generally takes almost a complete rebuild because every little part has a little teeny bit of play in it. And then when you add all that play up, then we call it slop. So chances are I'm going to have to do that eat the elephant thing where I'm going to have to fix every little part to get all the slop or all the clearance out of all the parts to get more of a responsive steering wheel.
The Jimmy resisted going into and out of park.
But I'm fairly certain what's going on with the column is in the linkage itself. See how it comes up and hits this thing?
Yeah.
That little tab right there? That tab gets hung underneath that edge.
So is that what's stopping it from going?
Yeah, from going into park. So really, I think all I really got to do is just massage on that little bracket, little button right there. If that button was just a tick shorter, it would just clear. It would go right past it.
Okay.
I took the pawl, which had been worn severely, and I basically domed it a little bit to make it actuate a little smoother. I also got rid of as much of the groove that was cut in it that I could get out of it. The only real way to make it really any better is to find a column. And finding a column for a 71 Jimmy, which is not the same as a truck column, it's a little different, is like pulling teeth. And we're better to do what we had to do to fix it than we were to try to replace it.
The issue with the Jimmy reminds me of some of the other previous builds we've had at FantomWorks. You might remember some of these. If you folks remember, we had an ice cream truck we messed with. It was a 1963 Jeep Willys Fleetvan. Ron and Valerie owned it, and the problem was it was scary to drive. What we discovered was all of their steering system was tied to the front frame rails. The entire frame rails were moving back and forth about a full inch with each time they turned right and left. So tightening up the frame and actually adding a bumper and a reinforcing beam to that frame was the single most important step on fixing the Willys Fleetvan. Another one was the problem with Meryl and Lynn's 1959 Chevy Apache. The issue there was front springs. In the case of an Apache, the truck can't actually turn until the springs have absorbed all of the turning. And I know that may sound confusing, but effectively, if I'm going to move left or right, I need to do it from solid ground. And if I try and shift left or right while standing on a big bowl of Jell-O, it's going to affect the way I take off and I start a run. Well, the Chevy Apache was a little bit like trying to steer or trying to start off from a race while standing on a big bowl of Jell-O. Your feet don't get any traction, and so you don't really go where you want to go. You end up slipping and not taking off, and you end up losing the race. The Chevy Apache was the very same thing. Chevrolet had designed the suspension back in the 50s to have little tiny tires on it and a lighter truck than ultimately folks today built. And by time you add all of these new additions to that truck was taking off and trying to steer from a big bowl of Jell-O, and it just wasn't working. So we had to start by trying to fix as much of the Jell-O as we could and solidifying it so that we could make the truck actually turn left and right. Dealing with steering is generally one of two things. It's either finding the smoking gun and dealing mostly with it, or it's dealing with 10 sort of warm little tiny guns and fixing all of them. We were fortunate in the case of the Willys Fleetvan that we found a monster smoking gun with that frame that was so loose. We also found a similar smoking gun on the Apache in that we had all the spring movement that was taking place before the steering. The 71 was a little bit different. The Jimmy was really more about where in the steering column, where in the gearbox, where in the center link, where in everything. And then when you added those great big tires to it, that was sort of the straw that broke the camel's back. So ultimately, although they're all similar in that you have to find the problem and address every single issue that there is, in the case of the 71 Jimmy, it was more about finding a whole bunch of little smoking guns, and once we addressed them, the thing actually steered really well. Thanks for joining us, folks. This time in the comments below, please let me know what your favorite really weird FantomWorks build has been, whether it's been the ice cream truck or the 1959 Apache. Take care, and you know what to do. Hit those like, subscribe, and share buttons.